Behind the rhymes.
The mountain we all climb.
Long. The noises outside come into me, birds and cars, people, an errant bee. Somewhere a radio, voices drift, children run around, and in a sea of loneliness I am adrift. Look to the clock, look to the wall, a hollow weighty chest of longing and more. The mind turns in, adds weight to the heart, longing for touch, but afraid again to start. Putting a jigsawed heart back together again, can't risk a lost piece, but it's already incomplete, alone again.
What lies behind these rhymes, Andrew?
So this is about loneliness and the loneliness that I felt after a long-term relationship of mine ended.
When and where did you write these poems?
So I was living on my own at the time after a relationship of over 20 years finished, and the silence was quite oppressive. I felt the silence there, and so the noises outside, I could hear all these noises. But this is not written at the time. This is more a retrospective poem.
Does this happen often? Do you often write retrospectively to process your feelings?
No, so normally the way I write is I write as things are happening, or maybe 1 or 2 days afterwards. But this one, this experience itself was at least 5 or 6 years ago. So no, it's quite unusual for me to time travel like that, if you like, inside my head. Although I do reflect quite a lot as a person.
You write about a jigsawed heart. That sounds very painful. What is it about?
I guess on the surface of it, it's a broken heart. It's a jigsawed heart, if you like. I thought it was a clever choice of words there because a person is more than just one piece. We are like jigsaws, really. And there are times when you've had a relationship, a good relationship or bad sometimes, where that's ended. You have lost a small piece of yourself there. And sometimes it's not possible to put that piece back into place again.
That's very well put together.
How did this poem affect you?
Well, I realized that it's about a failed relationship. Um, Obviously, I've had a few of those in my life, so I could identify with the poem. But then in the end, I saw that it's also about loneliness. And again, yours is related to loneliness in relation to a failed relationship. I've also felt loneliness, but funnily enough, as I lived in London for 20 years, you're surrounded by people, yet you can feel lonely. So your last verse actually reminded me of that feeling. So it had a dual effect on me when I heard it. Would you now like to read it again for our listeners?
Long. The noises outside come into me, birds and cards, people, an errant bee. Somewhere a radio, voices drift, children run around, and in a sea of loneliness I am adrift. Look to the clock, look to the wall, a hollow weighty chest of longing and more. The mind turns in, adds weight to the heart, longing for touch, but afraid again to start. Putting a jigsawed heart back together again, can't risk a lost piece, but it's already incomplete, alone again.
You've been listening to Behind the Rhymes, the mountain we all climb, with me, Maya.
And me, Andrew. If you like this podcast, look out for more by us on Anchor, Google Podcasts, Breaker,
Pocket Casts, Radio Public, and Spotify.
You have been listening to the last episode of our first series of Behind the Rhymes, The Mountain We All Climb. We hope you enjoyed it and will continue to listen to our second series, which is coming up later on this year.
This will coincide with Andrew's first book after the applause, Pandemic Poetry of a Frontline Nurse, which is published later this year by Austin Macaulay. In the meantime, we're working on a special episode, so watch this space.
Thank you for listening, liking, and subscribing to Behind the Rhymes with me, Andrew.
And me, Maya. Please share it with friends, colleagues, family, and poetry lovers you may know. Art reflects the period we live in, but what I find interesting is that you let your artistic gift manifest in a period in which we all feel like we've lost a year of our lives, as if we live in emptiness, with the masks we wear on our faces clouding our minds. How do you find inspiration in all of this? What did you see in this crisis?
Well, I wrote poetry before this crisis, I wrote poetry during. I will carry on writing poetry afterwards as well. Some of my poetry is sociological in nature, observational, humanistic, and I think I saw in COVID and Corona times an enhancement of people and their behaviors. It was more noticeable. So I wrote poems about selfishness. I mean, selfishness as a concept exists all the time, but it just seemed more heightened um, when you've got people at the moment who are vaccine deniers, COVID deniers. It's just, I mean, these people were probably deniers of things before, but it just seems to have brought everything to the forefront, where it's really in your face now.
Being part of the medical staff tasked to deal with COVID in the United Kingdom, I'd like to ask, is this a way you rid yourself of the weight of responsibility that you let amass during that battle?
So it's true that I wrote as an expression of dealing with some of the traumas that I saw during my time on ICU. I was redeployed to ICU. I've worked as a nurse for 20 years, but I work in theatres primarily. But so some of the things I saw were extraordinary, I would say, even though I've been around sort of death before. The level of death and grieving was quite intense. Um, Even for the normal ITU nurses who'd worked around and had been around as long as me and longer, some of them, it was unprecedented. They'd never seen anything like it. So I wrote as a means of expression, as a means of stopping these thoughts that were intrusive on my time away from work, in that invaded my sleep. It was a means to just to get those concepts, those thoughts out, to stop them from being in my head. I've always written. I've written for years. I've written since I was a kid. So poetry is something actually that's come out of the last several years, I would say, mainly because it's short form and it's easier to do. There was one instance while I was on shift where I was looking after a Syrian gentleman. He was a refugee. He'd come over here with his wife and 3 young children, and he'd been sort of dying for about a week. They'd said they were expecting him to die, and I was looking after him on a Friday. I'd never met him before, but I'd worked near him, so I knew of him. You always got to know the patients that were nearby, and visiting was quite difficult, and his wife couldn't come in, and anybody who visited anyway then had to quarantine for 14 days at that point. So it was quite difficult for people to come in and grieve and be with the loved ones. Some did. She had 3 children. She was here alone. She didn't have anybody to look after the kids, so she couldn't come in. So the ITU sister came up with the idea, let's call her on speakerphone. So this gentleman was sort of deteriorating. So they called his wife, and she spoke in Syrian, so I couldn't understand anything she was saying. I don't think she spoke a lot of English. She was saying something sort of repetitive. I imagine was a prayer of some sort. I could have been wrong. This gentleman was sedated, asleep. He wasn't awake. I mean, he possibly could hear. The hearing comes and goes when you sedated like that. Um, I could hear her children in the background as she was on the phone. She was upset, crying, and saying these repetitive words. The kids were in the background, doing what kids do, totally oblivious to what was happening. And um, she carried on talking, and a single tear rolled down his face. And then he died. And she carried on talking, and I think the ITU sister had to explain. Obviously, she couldn't see that her husband had passed away, but that was quite emotionally breaking on all of us. There was three of us there. There was me, another ITU nurse, and the sister there. That was with that gentleman. We were holding his hands. One of it, I think I was holding the phone. Actually, I think the other two were holding the hands, and that was quite devastating. And on my break, we were sent out after that, just because it's quite an emotionally intense experience. On my break, I wrote a poem called "The Last Tear," just as a way of sort of expressing those feelings. And the patients all had diaries, so because they lose time while they're asleep, there's some research to say that when they wake up, if they've lost a month of time, it's quite disorientating for them. So they have this idea where they keep a diary of every day, basically, so the families can read, the patient can read and see what they've missed, basically, this chunk of time that they've missed. And I told the ITU sister, oh, I've just written a poem on my break, and she was like, oh, you should write it in the diary. And I was like, well, what's the point of that? His wife can't read or speak English. She's not gonna gain anything from that. And she said to me, no, you should write it in there because his children one day will be able to read this. And so I wrote that in the back of the diary of that patient, and it's also in my first book as well. In fact, actually, it's the last poem in my first book.
Amid your poems, there's some of an introspective nature. You reflect on yourself as well, your states of being happy and sad, as well as on the best version of yourself. How do you work on attaining the best version of yourself? What do you think is the most important part there?
I don't sort of isolate one specific part, but I can say that working on myself um, is a daily thing. Um, I've been to counselling 4 times in the last several years. Counselling, for anybody that's been to counselling, knows that a lot of the work for counselling is done after counselling. It's not done during the session. It's done when you go away and you start to think, and then you come back the week after. And so my poetry allows me to do that. In fact, I use my poetry for therapy. I used to take a poem to my counsellor every week rather than, they used to ask you to keep a notebook of things. I used to take a poem, but I have to work every day. It's not, you go to 6 sessions of counselling and you're cured. This is an ongoing thing. Like life is an ongoing thing, and the struggles of life and everything that goes along with it is ongoing. And people look after their bodies. They look after what they eat. They exercise, but they seem to forget to take care of the inside as well, and that's that sort of care that is forgotten. And so it's not easy to take care of yourself. It's not easy at all, and each day is different and brings different challenges. Um,
Coming back to the COVID crisis, as a medical professional, what do you think? How is this crisis going to end? What are the consequences?
well, I don't think this crisis is going anywhere soon. I've written poems about that, actually. Immunization is the way forward, but it's not the answer to this. We will wear masks for years to come. Social distancing will be in place for years to come. Even when the government says you don't have to wear masks or social distance anymore, people will be very skeptical about that. Coronavirus is not going anywhere. I think we're going to be living that with that for some time, and we've got the effects of this to come yet. I mean, there's the short term effects that we're seeing now due to people being isolated, due to lockdowns, due to social distancing, due to not being able to meet with families. But there's bigger things coming after this. In my profession, there's a whole wave of PSD, post traumatic stress disorder that's coming. That's on the way. I've experienced that myself. Sometimes it still comes now. When you dream of work, when you're not at work, it's intrusive. There's a whole wave of this coming for years, which will affect my profession and the wider public as well. And then there's the economic issues, which are going to be with us for years to come. My generation may not pay for this, but the ones below are going to be paying for this for some time.
As a poet, I'd like you to encourage our listeners a little through your example of the opportunities you have to seek within yourself, and you've managed to do this successfully. Did you expect to have your first poetry collection picked up by a publisher?
Well, there's a really easy answer to that, and the answer is no. Um, I've written for years. I've tried to get stuff published in the past. In my twenties, in my mid 20s, I think is the last time, and then I gave up. I had so many rejection letters that I just lost faith in the system and publishing and all that kind of stuff. And then I picked up writing, but I only shared that stuff sort of on social media and with selected family members. I didn't ever have an idea that that was for a wider audience. And then I met my current partner, and I shared the poems with her, uh, and she was very encouraging. She was like, "No, this is really good stuff. You should share this. You should share this." And I was very dismissive. Who's going to be interested in this stuff? She was saying no, 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 and I was quite sort of I was fighting, and then I thought, you know what? What's the harm in that? I'll send it off. So after some research, it was sent off to three publishers. Two were not interested. The third one came back and wanted to publish it, which was quite a surprise to me. In fact, it actually encouraged me to carry on writing. It encouraged me to put a second book together, which is also with the publisher, and it's just been accepted for publication. And in some ways, my second book's as a concept is better than the first. So the first book is called After the Applause, Pandemic Poetry, The Frontline Nurse. That will come out this year. And then I'm just in the process of negotiating the second one, which is called From the Mountain to the Waterfall of Love and Relationships. So it's interesting what somebody in your life can do when they come along and give you a totally different perspective and give you the courage to pursue something which you don't always have. I still have self doubts about my work now, but I guess the proof is in the fact that I will soon have a book in my hand, which I've been trying to do effectively for the last sort of 30 years of my life, on and off.
So it looks like you've been inspired to continue writing, and you said you have a second book coming up. What are your plans for after that? Do you think you'll still be writing? Do you think you'll change career?
I don't plan to stop writing, so even if I don't become some huge author, world famous author, or poet laureate, or I will still carry on writing, because writing serves another purpose for me as a means to express myself and to just to get things from the inside out. I'm not going to stop that. I am thinking about a third book at the minute because I'm constantly writing, although writing comes and goes as a muse. Sometimes I can write 2 or 3 poems in a week. Sometimes it can be a few months. I'm in the process of developing a study day to help my medical colleagues to try and get over this and to prove that actually anybody can write poetry. It's not a matter of judgment about the quality of your work. It's about expression. Poetry is expression. So in the minute in the process of planning to deliver to develop and deliver a course that helps people process and develop and maybe inspire as well. So no, I don't. I've written since a child, and I've had some breaks in between, but I don't plan on stopping writing now.
I would like to ask you a bit of a personal question. You will continue writing. This satisfies a side of you which may have been shut down for whatever reasons for a while in your previous life. You also mentioned that you recently met a new partner. So you're in your 40s. How would you say these events changed your outlook on life? Because quite a lot of us find ourselves in midlife wondering whether what we did before was the right choices, where we're going next. So, can you please explain that?
Well, I've just about to make 21 years as a nurse, and that actually wasn't the first choice of career for me. I trained as a microbiologist at university before that, and and the way the job market was in the 90s, couldn't get a job, so I retrained myself. So I've been doing a job for the last 21 years, which wasn't my vocation. Like some people have a vocation and are able to do that and fulfill that. Although it's been a very good profession for me, which I've enjoyed, on and off during periods of those 21 years. Um, I often think about sort of fame and the way people deal with fame, and you see people who, they write sort of a book, a really really popular book, or they make an album as a musician, or they make a good film, and how they follow that up. They struggle to follow that success, especially if they're doing that sort of early in life. They then struggle to ever recapture that success, and it's a constant battle of, do they redo things that they've done in the past. It's always a battle. I don't have that pressure as a middle-aged man. I've come about this from the opposite way. I've had a book, I have a second book, I have a third book in mind. If none of these are particularly successful, then they're not. I don't feel the pressure that you feel when you're younger. I have a career to fall back on. Um, being a full time writer was, when I was before microbiology, I wanted to be a screenwriter, I wanted to be a director. Those things never came off. I kept though an interest in film and writing and things like that. But I don't know, I don't feel the pressure that you feel when you're 18 and 21. Now I'm happy to have a physical book in my hand, which I can show my children and say, look, your dad wrote a book. Um, as for influences later in life, relationships. My second book is all about relationships, and it's actually, the concept is a mountain hike, um, sort of seen through the eyes of a relationship, where it starts off well and then has the peak and then there's the trough afterwards. So you never know what is coming for you in life, and I've often wondered what you would do given that information. Would you live a life? Would you try and correct your life? If you could go back, would you, if you knew what was coming, would you correct it? So you never know, and it's interesting. I never counted on the influence of meeting a partner in my late 40s, but I certainly feel the benefits of that now, um, because it's helping me realize some ambitions which I've had for many years, which I couldn't, due to self doubt and rejection, I couldn't do myself. So now I have what I would call a partnership, which I've strove for all my life. It's a true partnership.
Andrew, I thank you for having this conversation with me, and I wish you success in your poetic endeavors, in your work, daily battle against COVID, and in your relationship.
Thank you.